Hey, good afternoon. Thank you everybody for joining us here today. I'm Sarah Cleveland, and I am the strategic advisor for ExtraHop. I am a retired Air Force colonel, and I have lived the struggle of providing secure data and communications in contested, challenged, and austere environments. So I've served in various combat roles in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other places. So I want to give a big thanks to ExtraHop for providing the opportunity for me to be here. If you're interested in learning more about ExtraHop and our approach to network detection and response, please visit booth N as in November 6245. So that's November 6245. So I'm lucky today to be sharing the stage with two extraordinary cyber professionals in the cyber arena. It's a big bucket list item for me to be here at RSA with Dr. Biljana Lilly and Lior Div. They're literal giants in the cyber domain. So Dr. Biljana Lilly is a cybersecurity and foreign policy leader with over 20 years of managerial, technical, and research experience. She is the chair of the Democratic Resilience Track of the Warsaw Security Forum and an advisor to the venture capital firm NightDragon. Dr. Lilly has worked at the United Nations and has advised the Pentagon, that five-sided puzzle palace, the White House, and other organizations that you can talk to her about later. And she is the author of 2 books and takes pride in being denounced by the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But and also too, you may have seen that she has a couple books at the bookstore. They are sold out, but you can find them on Amazon. And then Mr. Lior Div is a cybersecurity tech founder and CEO, as well as a former nation-state hacker. He is an internationally renowned expert in offensive and defensive cybersecurity, hacking operations, forensics, reverse engineering, malware analysis. Did I go out? Okay, sorry about that. Kind of like the whole build-up. Right?
Russian, they don't like it.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's got to be it. We're being watched. So he has a unique perspective on the most advanced attack techniques and how to leverage that knowledge along with generative AI to gain an advantage over the adversary. So, Dr. Lilly, Mr. Div, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
So we all know, or at least we have a hunch, that the world is becoming a more contested environment in cyberspace. As populations become more reliant on the cyber domain for day-to-day life, it creates a big target that impacts our way of life. As a necessary element, and it's a necessary center of gravity for those who seek to gain power. So for this forum, I'd like to focus on the big ones, which is China, Russia, and Iran. So we're going to start the questions. Are you ready? All right, to Biljana. Biljana, can you give us an overview of Russia's cybersecurity strategy, particularly against the United States? And how much do organizations in the US need to worry about that Russian cyber threat now and over the next 12 months?
That's a great question. So, to the Russian government, cyber operations are part of a strategy known as information warfare. And there are so many people that use different names: cognitive warfare, hybrid warfare, political warfare, measures short of war. But it all refers to the same idea. Then this is defined as confrontation between 2 or more states in the information space. And the Russians call the information space what we in the West understand as cyberspace. So in that particular context, in the information warfare context, cyber operations have 2 different objectives. One is to inflict damage on the technological and digital infrastructure of the adversary, which in this case is the US. And the second is to erode and manipulate the decision-making power of the adversary. And this is basically to affect our minds, our behavior. So in this context, cyber operations have two objectives. One is technical and the second is psychological. And because of the ability or the intention to achieve these different objectives, cyber operations are often combined with disinformation or influence operations, with, in some cases, protests, assassinations, explosions, and even coup d'etats in different cases. And it's a great question, like, what should we expect in the next 12 months? What exactly types of cyber attacks should we expect from specifically Russian APTs? And when we think about that, it is a key to remember that cyber operations are a part of this doctrine, which is a part of Russian foreign policy. So cyber operations will be guided and constrained by Russia's priorities towards the United States at any given time. And we've heard over the past 2 years, roughly, that the Russian government has multiple times promised to retaliate or warned to retaliate against the US because of the US support for Ukraine. But we haven't really seen those massive, large-scale, significant cyber attacks against our infrastructure from Russian APTs. So this naturally begs the question, like, why? And I think it's a very important question to answer, because based on that, we can understand what are the current constraints of the Russian government, because once those constraints change, then I think we will see a lot more enhanced cyber activity from Russian APTs against critical infrastructure in the US. And I think there are 3 constraints or 3 conditions that when they change, we will see an increased activity. First is that Russia's priority is still to win the war in Ukraine. And because of that, Russia's cyber capabilities are focused on that theater of operations. Second, the Russian human and technical cyber capabilities have been significantly impacted by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Since February of 2022, there was a massive exodus of Russians outside of Russia. Between 500,000 and 1 million Russians left the country. And that included about 10% of Russia's IT labor force. And if we think about this, who typically can leave a country on a very short notice when the country is about to mobilize for war, is mobilizing for war, and the economic situation is so uncertain? It's usually people who are educated, who speak a foreign language, who have connections abroad. So that 10% of the IT workforce that left the country, I think, is probably the creme de la creme of Russia's IT forces. And another constraint is that the tools that Russia's APT use, specifically the ones that work for the GRU, SVR, and FSB, rely a lot on Western technology. And a lot of the Western companies, the Western tech giants, left Russia or ceased most of their operations there since the war in Ukraine started. So, for example, just one example is that the FSB's notorious surveillance tool SORM uses Nokia and Cisco hardware. So once those companies left, they imposed a constraint on Russia's ability to replenish its offensive tool sets. So I think when we see a change in those 3 constraints, focus on Ukraine, technical and actual talent that left the country, we will see an increased activity from Russian APTs against critical infrastructure. And when that happens, I specifically am concerned about attacks against the telecommunications and energy sectors in the US.
Thank you. So, Lior.
Yeah, I think that the easiest way to think about it, and in order to see kind of the future of what's coming, we have to go back and understand what's happened in the past few years, because it was fascinating in the arena of cybersecurity, specifically when it comes to Russia. So if you think about the period of time before the war in the Ukraine, we were seeing here in the US an increase of ransomware attack, that the majority of them came from a group inside Russia, and it was not part of the Russian government, but it was kind of affiliate, kind of supported. Basically, the Russian government said, you can work here, we're not gonna do anything. And basically, by not doing anything, they gave them kind of the okay to operate. And we saw the rise of ransomware. And ransomware for us, it's a business model. It's the combination between hacking capability and crypto. Once you combine those two together, you have the ability to generate revenue. And those groups that behave almost like companies in 2019 and before, starting to generate a lot of money for them. And we were tracking them back then, and you could go to their Instagram pages and to see their cars and to see how they live and to see what they are doing. So they were very, very open about it. Around 2 weeks before the invasion to the Ukraine, and of course we didn't know that that thing gonna happen, we started to see kind of a drop in the ransomware activity, to the point that we thought that we have some problem in our system. So it's like we started to figure out, it's like if something is going on, because it's like suddenly they were attacking, and you could almost predict kind of how much activity is going to happen in a certain day. Suddenly that thing just disappeared. It took kind of 2 weeks later to see kind of the invasion to the Ukraine and hindsight investigation to basically realize that many of those people that were occupied by running their companies, basically this is kind of the ransomware cartel in Russia, were recruited into the government or enlisted to a government operation. And this is kind of a lot of the brain and the capability was kind of put into the effort of the war to the Ukraine and starting to operate over there. And then after that, you saw a significant drop of almost 2 years and more, that we didn't see a lot of activity that was coming outside of the realm of the Russian-Ukraine situation. There is one use case that I think that happened lately that will trigger kind of the beginning of Russia to kind of the arena, and this is the hack on Microsoft. It's like some people, it's like heard about it, some people didn't, but it's like it's known right now that the Russian government was hacking Microsoft and were targeting a specific kind of executive over there in order to steal information and to know what's going on inside Microsoft. But if you zoom out and you don't treat it as yet another hack, you can think about it, okay, this is the time that Russia is saying, okay, we're back in full force, and now we're gonna see more of that thing or those type of capability coming to fruition. So it's like, in a sense, you can mark this date and say, it's like, okay, this is kind of the day that Russia is coming back and starting to implement their basically agenda that they're very, open about it. They're saying that they're gonna do it. Absolutely. They're not saying when. But I think that now it's the time, and my prediction is that we will see a big shift in the upcoming kind of years.
So Lior, on that note, how about China?
Oh, that's much simpler, right? Because I'm joking, but I'm not joking. Yeah. Because when you think about China, most of the time they are saying what they're gonna do in a very clear way, and then they're actually starting and executing it. And I'm referring to something, and you can search it over the internet. Sometimes it's called Made in Beijing, or sometimes it's called Made in China 2025. And basically the government over there is saying, hey, China needs to be independent in these 16 kind of type of things that we need to be able to manufacture, all the way from different type of weapon, drugs, technology, and they kind of really detailed the type of technology that they want to be independent. And then what you see a very clear correlation between this list and the type of hacking that they're doing. We believe that right now China reached to the point that they're collecting more information in cyber espionage than they can actually process. And that was true to a year ago before Gen AI came into the picture. And now we believe that using Gen AI, and that's a whole topic to discuss, we believe that they can digest this information and summarize this information in order to kind of squeeze and find the details that they need in order to understand part of the information that they collected. It's important to have an asterisk that they are collecting encrypted data as well, with the belief that when quantum computing will be there, they will be able to decrypt that thing, and basically using Gen AI in order to read it and to summarize it and understand what there is there. So for us, it's not a surprise that they are very, very active. But for example, you can see that we almost never saw China doing ransomware attacks. So they're not doing a distractive attack in order to interfere in the day-to-day operation of a company. Usually it's about stealing information and staying there as much as they can for as long as they can.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask you another question. Okay, Iran. How much are they really a threat to the United States and their public and private sector?
This is, for me, it's an interesting question because there is a big riddle over there. Just to understand Iran. Iran was operating for many years using affiliation. So it's group that kind of work for the government, but not really, and did espionage operation and sometimes destructive operation, like we see in the Aramco and others. But they try to stay away from attribution, so somebody will be able to say, hey, this is the Iranian government doing this operation. Because they wanted kind of this gap between the operation that it's happening and the agenda that they have. And cyber is an elegant enough tool to create this separation between the two. Lately, with the direct attack from Iran to Israel, that was the first time in the past 40 years that Iran actually did something that have a clear attribution between them to a foreign country. So they are saying, hey, we're attacking you guys, and here is a missile, and basically this is kind of a clear attribution. This is kind of raised the question mark in the cyber arena. Is it going to change their kind of day-to-day operation when it comes to cyber, to use it as a direct tool between them to somebody, Israel or any other country? Right now, we did not saw any kind of direct attribution from Iran. They're still using the same method of using affiliation and others. But I think that many things are moving right now, and we need to watch very carefully to see if they're changing their kind of foreign policy and starting to use cyber as a tool to influence.
Right. So with that new boldness, Biljana, are these entities teaming up on the cyber front? Are they getting more bold at working together?
Yeah, it's a great question, because it seems like they have a lot of overlapping objectives, but from the examples that are known and in the public space, I'd say it seems like they're more either competing with each other, spying on each other, or impersonating each other in false flag operations. For example, let's look at Iran and Russia first. A few years ago, Iranian hacking group Oil Rig was itself hacked by the Russian group Turla. Turla stole Oil Rig's tools and then used them to breach the networks of targets in over 35 countries. Then the Iranians returned the favor, and in their the campaign was called Enemies of the People around the 2020 US elections. They impersonated Russians, but we discovered that it was the Iranians behind the attack. So the relationship between Russia and Iran is, to me, more competitive, adversarial, and they're basically trying to impersonate each other. China and Russia have a different relationship. The Chinese used to learn from the Russians, and in the previous century, some of China's PLA leadership even studied in Soviet universities, in military academies, and they studied a version of what we now call psychological operations. And today, it seems that China is still viewing Russia, despite the fact that they have a deepening relationship around Ukraine. China seems to still view Russia as a target of the theft of sensitive military technological information. We have an example from 2022 when Chinese hackers tried to breach the networks of several Russian military institutes and steal data focused on satellite technologies, radar, and electronic warfare. That said, I would have said a few days ago that I don't see a likelihood between Russia and China cooperating in cyberspace against the US, but there was a recent report from the intelligence community in the US saying that they're cooperating more militarily, and they're even looking at a potential invasion of Taiwan scenario where they cooperate with each other. And I asked actually Senator Warner yesterday, who was on stage here at RSA, I asked him, do you envision the possibility of them cooperating in cyber activity against US critical infrastructure? And he said yes. So now I believe that there may be a potential, despite the environment of secrecy and deeply ingrained distrust in which those APTs operate, there may be a possibility for us to see actually a joint cyber operation against critical infrastructure.
I think that the easiest way to understand it is each and every one of them have independent agenda that they are carrying. And if it's happened to be that the agenda is crossing path, then we will see them working together. But I don't think that it's going to be a modus operandi that they're going to leverage on a day-to-day.
I agree.
So keeping that in mind, what sorts of threats from these actors do you think the U.S. organization should be anticipating, and how do you think the best way to defend themselves will be?
Yeah. So, for example, from the Russians, I would I think because their focus is still on Ukraine, and I believe their most sophisticated cyber threat groups are still focused on that theater, I think we will see more of the types of operations where non-state actors from Russia, still affiliated with the Russian government, conduct operations. But I think those operations will have technical as well as psychological effect. And we have a good example of that in January of this year, when a hacker group that is affiliated with Russia's GRU Sandworm tampered with the water system in a Texan water facility, and the water overflew. And in addition to actually tampering with the water system, the group also supposedly took a video of the whole operation and posted it on their Telegram channel. So this is how they're trying to also spread the psychological effect, or amplify the psychological effect of the operation by showing it and publicizing it. And the second type of operations I think we will see a continuation of, and Lior already mentioned those, that's ransomware attacks. And Lior, I completely agree with you when you say they're not necessarily conducted by Russian state-sponsored entities, but they're conducted with the knowledge and with the support and blessing of the Russian government from Russian territory. And I think the activities of law enforcement, especially over the past year, have been commendable in trying to take down some of the infrastructure of these ransomware groups, like Lockbit, for example. But it seems that even those activities have only temporary disruptive effects. Mm-hmm. Let's say when Lockbit was taken down, for the next 2 months, we saw less of the Lockbit code being used in different ransomware attacks. Mm-hmm. But then new affiliates emerged, and they filled the vacuum, and the attacks continued against hospitals, schools, and financial institutions. So I think this is probably not going to be a problem that we're going to solve anytime soon.
And the last thing to add is everything that related to the election.
Yes.
So November, the election is coming. We will see a spike, and the spike's supposed to start already, of fake news. And for example, we in my previous company, before the election in 2020, basically it was a whole campaign of a fake news on us as a private company. And I was, as a CEO of a company, super surprised, because it's like, yes, I want to think that we're great and we're big, but it's like to be in the kind of bullseye of the Russian, and they created movies, articles, and I just share with you kind of the full kind of way that they operate. So it was fascinating to see it, because it was not just, hey, one blog post that's saying, hey, this company is not good, or this company is working with the government. You see kind of a very methodical operation that it started by building personas, and after building personas, starting to put some information, and then starting to quote this information in order to justify what they are saying. They're building kind of a whole knowledge base to prove that we as a private company was cooperating and working with the government and doing bad things. And you can go kind of almost 10 hopes before, and to see that one quote the other, quote the other, quote the other. And needless to say that we were tracking that thing, sharing with the FBI, and was very concerned about it. But you see the power of that thing, that it becomes suddenly a reality, and it's over the internet, and there is movies about it, and there is short video clips, and there is kind of a full article about it, and you become kind of the target of a fake news, and there is nothing that you can do about it, because you cannot just clean the internet and say, hey, I didn't do it. And this is kind of a personal experience of how kind of that thing can influence a company that's not related to the election, but will be affected. And probably it will be other companies, and other companies will be affected in the upcoming election.
So I'm glad you brought up the election, because that's on top of mind for everybody, and the misinformation. But as we move into the actual election coming forth, do you see an infrastructure component to it?
Yeah, it's interesting. There is one big question mark. It was the XZ backdoor that was discovered a few kind of weeks ago. And in this backdoor, if you know the story, it's good. If not, basically somebody tried to create a vulnerability in the SSH in order to have access to basically every kind of machine that's running out there. And I'm just simplifying the story. But the interesting question around it is who from those kind of group and attribution, who had the kind of the motivation to create this type of operation? Because once you have this type of an access, you can access every machine that exists out there. You can do whatever you want. And it's like somebody was sophisticated enough in one hand in order to start carrying the operation. It's feel like the Russian and sounds like the Russian. Why? Because if you go back to the SolarWind attack, you can see kind of almost the same modus operandi from one end. But from the other end, it's like somebody can mimic them and decide that they're doing kind of like the Russian, but not really the Russian. So it's very hard to draw kind of, and many people tried to say this is kind of the direct attribution. But for sure there is a force somewhere there that has the motivation and kind of the ability to carry this type of attack.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think we're going to see all three, Iran, China, and Russia, trying to influence either the outcome of the 2024 elections or try to exacerbate the divisions that already exist in our communities before and after the elections, and especially after the elections, to try to incite violence. This is right out of Russia's playbook, and I think they're not going to miss the opportunity to use this period in our, basically in our democracy, because they see elections as an opportunity to exploit a vulnerability. So that's what our elections is for them. And given in prior years and prior election cycles, we have Iran, China, and Russia trying to influence the elections in various ways. I'm specifically worried this time about influence operations and deepfakes used in the elections. And we've heard by so many experts that already that concern being voiced, and we have a lot of examples of deepfakes being used around elections just in the past few months in Slovakia, Moldova, South Africa, Taiwan, and even in India. And they're used by domestic actors as well as foreign actors. And we already have an example, if you remember, in New Hampshire during the New Hampshire primaries, of a deep fake of President Biden's voice being used to try to dissuade voters from going to the polls and voting on election day. The good news is that the governor of the state said that most likely the effect of this deep fake was insignificant because there was still a high voter turnout on election day and people still voted and the election went fine. But if a deep fake is generated of the right person or representative at the right time, just the day before the election, it could have an effect, and this is what worries me the most.
Yeah, just to build on that point, it's like many people are concerned when we're talking about deep fake and AI and kind of all the progress that we see in the past year about AI. People are talking about kind of, it has to be secure, and how can we control it, and so on and so forth. And by all means, this is a valid conversation. But when I'm looking at the danger, it's not about what we do. I'm looking at what China is doing, what Russia is doing, and which type of model they're building without safety, and how they're going to leverage it when they're working in a different set of values in order to weaponize those kind of algorithms to do whatever they need. So now when we tie that thing to an election, the ability to generate a model that spit out fake news, but in a rapid way, and creating kind of not just fake news, fake everything, the ability to create kind of a lot of content and the content to look real, it's like the technology is already there. And we know that China is working on this type of technology. Now the question is how much they're going to leverage it in the upcoming election and how kind of we're going to see it. So yes, in New Hampshire, it didn't create any damage. And I will add the word yet. It didn't create that damage yet because in the upcoming election, it's already see that the election is going to be very tight. So suddenly, if you really do the math, you don't need to swing a lot of vote. You need just a few of them in order to decide who is going to, rule the country or the most powerful country in the world right now.
So that brings up a good point. The elections happen. It's toward the end of 2024. So for Biljana, for you, I'm going to ask you first. So what is your biggest concern for beyond 2024? And is there anything good that's going to happen beyond that?
Okay, so first let's survive 2024 because I'm a little concerned about that. I'd say biggest concern is probably cyber operation against critical infrastructure in the US that causes fatalities, like it has direct human loss. And I'm specifically concerned about the lack of regulation and the poor cybersecurity standards of the dam and water systems in the US. We have over 91,000 dams in the US. Only 5% of those fall under federal regulation, and only 1% of those have been audited. Most of them are in private hands, and we have no federal oversight as to the efficiency and the maturity of their cybersecurity frameworks. We also know that over 2,200 of the dams in the US are very old, and they're categorized as high hazard, which means that if they fail to operate, this will likely result in human fatalities and casualties. So my concern is that cyber threat actors and different nation states know about the poor conditions of the dam and the water system, and we've seen that at least since 2013. There was an Iranian attack against a dam in New York, and we have again concerns raised about the Iranians trying to tinker with various water systems across the US last year. And we also had the example this year of January 2024 of a Russian hacktivist group affiliated with Sandworm also affecting a water system in Texas. So that's my biggest concern, that one of those attacks will actually be a lot more large scale and significant and will result in human casualties.
Yeah, and when she is concerned, let's prove it for a second. So it's like you're saying, it's like, can they do it? It's like, is it possible? Or this is just another, hey, somebody read about the doomsday scenario and it's like, it can happen. And the easiest way for me to explain that it is possible and it's here and now, we can take the Microsoft hack, go back to SolarWind and say, okay, they have some capability. Go all the way back to NotPetya. So many people think about NotPetya as, ransomware attack. But what's happened behind the scene, it's actually more interesting than it showed as a ransomware attack. We were the first team to be foot on the ground to help the cybersecurity police in the Ukraine in order to investigate their servers that they took from the company that was affected in order to really understand what just happened. And we were the company basically back then that found the kill switch in order to stop NotPetya from spreading around the world. So it's like, okay, we reverse engineer it, find that it cannot spread, thumbs up, the ransomware cannot spread. But then when we investigated it, what we really discovered that it's not a ransomware. That was a mechanism for the Russian to basically have access through the software of this company, to have access to every company in the Ukraine. And the way that they did it, they updated the software, and the software was a way to report taxes. So every company in the Ukraine had to use this software in order to report taxes. And basically what the Russian did, they knew the number, the identification number of the company, put it into the main server, then they get access to at least one computer in this company, and using that thing to spread around this company. So suddenly we moved from a ransomware situation, and they basically started to operate it as a ransomware situation, because what they wanted to clean after the operation, and they didn't want it, the world to know that actually we're talking about espionage and destruction operation and not a ransomware operation. And the reason that I'm sharing it is when you really discover and understand what's going on behind the scene and what are the capabilities of those countries, it's easy to think about the ability to control dams and other infrastructure if they want to. Because that's another big thing, because they well aware that if they're doing something like this, it's going to be a retaliation, and it's going to be a consequences as a result of that thing. So it's always the balance of how, courage and how much they believe that they can push the border. And right now, with everything that's going on with the Ukraine and everything that's going on in the Middle East, you can see this China, Iran, and Russia is pushing the border a little bit and feeling more, courage of executing things. So, as you said, I'm super concerned as well.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that idea of them pushing the borders and boundaries, because I think back to this whole idea, for nation states, cyber operations are part of foreign policy. They're a tool of statecraft. And because right now their relationship with the US is so bad and has deteriorated so much, and we have removed the opportunities to exert pressure on them. Russia is not a part of any right now international forum. It's not a part of the NATO Council anymore. There are sanctions against Russia from the US. There's very little that we can do, more we can do to push the Russians or to pressure the Russians to stop conducting operations against us. So they feel like the threshold is high and they can test the waters.
So we want to get to the good news here first, but I want to pull the thread on this, right? So is there something now that like used to be taboo, but now they're actually like all cards are off the table?
I think they're still going to be constrained because they know that the US can retaliate and so can NATO. And I think what is really helpful is that their congressional hearings, specifically when it comes to the security of water, the water systems in the US, their congressional hearings on the topic, they are very influential experts focusing on the problem. And I think raising awareness is the first step to fixing it. But so many of those dams and water systems across the US, they are underfunded, they are old, they rely on legacy systems. They are basically a target-rich environment, and they are resource poor. So I think that the good news, I'm trying to make it sound positive, but it's difficult.
No.
I'm hoping that because we are raising awareness, there will be some funding focused on those areas, and we'll be able to raise the cybersecurity standards and improve the cybersecurity posture.
Do you think our adversaries, though, are like, the water system used to be off limits, but now it's not? Or
So I will be a little bit more careful. I'll say that between cyber war and cyber, it's in the warfare, it's something that it's a tool to deliver a message.
yeah,
Because when you switch to a kinetic war, there is no style anymore.
mm-hmm.
Okay, you send bombs, things are exploded. There is a clear
message.
clear attribution.
Yeah.
Cyber is still used in the foreign politic and ability to send a message, signal that you can do something, but you don't really want to do it. Because if Russia really wanted to take them down, they can.
It's the Russians.
It's the Russians.
Yeah.
They can really literally bombard things.
Yeah.
But if you send a signal like they did in Texas with the water and took a video of it and publish it, so basically what they're saying, it's like, hey, we're in, we can do these type of things. It's like, please don't do whatever. And it's like, it's usually part of a bigger kind of context and a bigger kind of signal that they want to deliver. So I'm still in the belief that cyber is still tools that big nations want to use in order to deliver message to each other before they're kind of starting the kinetic war that, as I said, there is no style there.
So more for a message delivery rather than an effects-based delivery.
I think that this is kind of where we are, and again, we will see in the upcoming year if I'm right or not.
So Biljana, you talked about like it's great that we're now talking about it. So how can we talk about it more in an effective way to get a coalition of the willing to protect ourselves?
I think we are. Can you guys hear me? Is this good? Thank you. I think we are, and the fact that a lot of experts have brought it here at RSA as well, and the fact that we are talking about it, I think, is the first step to more regulation, to more government funding, because I think because this is a critical sector, this is infrastructure that is vital to our well-being and to our survival, I think we should seek more investment and more government funding to help basically the water communities, the owners of these dams and water systems to improve their cybersecurity defenses.
For me, it's a combination. The tech community was almost disconnected from the geopolitical situation for many years. And when you think about cyber, this is kind of when geopolitics, the IT and the ability to control your company and other, and the government is like all of them are coming together into working together into a single goal. And I think that each and every one of the people here in the room, you have a job to do a little bit in your companies. It doesn't matter if you're building a product or you're using a product or you're giving services, or you're part of the government, that it's like, or raising awareness. So I think that all of those things, and if I think about it like 10 years ago, we were like separated. We will never talk about geopolitics in RSA, and now it's like everything is commingled, and in order to protect the company, you have to understand kind of the bigger picture that's going on, and that thing makes us much stronger.
Okay, so I think this is the portion where we get to take audience questions. So I'm ready to entertain any questions from the audience if you have them. If you can step to the microphones in the center so that we can hear you and they can pick it up for the recording, that would be great. Thank you, sir, for being brave. It's the first one.
I'm not brave. I'm an insurance company. You could probably call me stupid for that reason. So we pay a lot of ransoms every year. I had a curiosity. You guys, is there any way to track this money? I mean, I know we have Instagram. These hackers are buying Maseratis and doing this whole thing with it. But is any of it getting back to the state in any way?
The main problem that we saw for many years about tracking is the jump between different jurisdictions. So even if you can, and for example, 2019, President Biden and Putin have a meeting, and Biden is saying to Putin, it's like, hey, you guys have to stop hacking this specific sector, because if not, it's gonna be a big deal. It's like, okay. So it's like, back then we knew that we know, it's like, who they are hacking, who are paying to, and it's like, who is getting the money, okay? It's like, and it was not like so complicated to understand who is getting the money, okay? We didn't need to track. But the problem is, okay, great, what are you doing about it? Because they are not living here, they are not under our jurisdiction, and it's like, besides asking from Russia to do something about it, couldn't do anything. And that's kind of the main problem. It's not about the tracking, it's about the doing, that coming after you knows that something happening, it's not under your control at all.
Yeah, it's kind of a moot point that way. Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Do we have another question? Yay, okay.
So I was just wondering, in the context of cyber warfare, and even the last example you just gave, what is the right way for us to escalate, right? Like when Russia or China or Iran hack us and we see these kind of issues in the cyber landscape, like how do we respond effectively, given that it's not it's very highly asymmetric, right? So, yeah.
It's a great question. I think we should remember that we don't have to respond to a cyber incident with a cyber incident. We don't have to respond in cyberspace. And I actually think we have to think about the adversary and think about where their pressure points are and what their pressure points are, and be more creative. I would say, in the case of Russia, if I were the president of the United States and I wanted to make them stop and actually take seriously the ransomware problem that originates from their territory, I would very overtly publicize the fact that I will increase support for Ukraine militarily, and I will make the Russian government fear more that than anything else. I would not retaliate with cyber attacks on critical infrastructure or anything else in Russia. I will focus on what they care about, which is winning in Ukraine, and I'll make sure that they don't, or they know that they won't, if they don't introduce, let's say, measures against ransomware attacks. And I think because I come from a foreign policy background, I think the ransomware problem is a political problem, and if President Putin and his and basically the Kremlin is being asked in a way that's effective to curb their ransomware, the ransomware crime that's happening from their territory, then we'll be successful in seeing a lot less attacks.
What you meant, ask with a baseball bat.
Yes.
Really asking.
Makes sense.
It's a great question.
We have time for a couple more questions.
Hello. I'd start off just by saying it's also a question related kind of to the cyber warfare part, but I also just like to say, as someone who's currently serving in the Air Force, a lot of respect for you, ma'am. But in terms of, let's say, things happening in Taiwan, what portion do you think the cyber warfare would play specifically on a domestic side, not necessarily, like say, right now everything is happening more between Ukraine and Russia, So not necessarily between Taiwan and China, but more between us and China. How do you think the cyber warfare would play out on that front?
I think that we have to look at it as the kind of the big picture, because if there is one lesson here, is that cyber is a tool in order to implement your foreign policy, in a sense. And if you want to deliver a message, this is a very effective way to deliver messages. So it will be depend of what message you want to deliver to whom and when, that people are going to start using, those.
Yeah, and to add to Lior's comments here, I agree with him. Cyber operations are used typically, if we learn from the Russian cases of Georgia, there was a 7-day war in 2008, and then Ukraine. They're usually used before kinetic force to try to establish information superiority and take over the command and control structures, the communication of the adversary. So this could be the Chinese, we know, are learning from the Russians and from the Russian examples. I'd imagine cyber being used in that space in this way as well.
And just to complete the thought, once you start a kinetic operation, cyber is taking a backseat.
Yeah,
So it's
true.
like you're starting with cyber, then kinetic war. Then once the bomb's starting to fly, it's like you less need the subtlety of cyber.
My question is about North Korea. So that's kind of another state that uses cyber warfare. Would you put it in the same category as these others, that they are using cyber for state objectives, or no? And do they ever cooperate with China, Russia, Iran?
Yeah. I'm personally putting them in a different category. And usually they're using cyber to generate revenue and stealing money. And we saw them less sophisticated with the subtleties of delivering messages and use it as a foreign policy. So it's like I would not put them in the exact same category as China and Russia, that they are super sophisticated, and in Iran that it's like starting to learn and use it and use it in a kind of more aggressive way.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
I'd be curious if you could expand, beyond APTs and talk a little bit about supply chain in terms of, particularly with the PRC and to a lesser extent Russia. We have a lot of we'll call like licit entities and companies that are present within the U.S. and allied ICT supply chains. And so if there's risk stemming from companies that are subject to the jurisdiction of or otherwise directed by these countries, and what risks that might pose to the U.S. and allies.
One thing I will say about supply chain, it's like usually when we saw a supply chain attack, it was related and attributed to a more nation-state hacking and more sophisticated group. Now, it's like my biggest concern right now that we will take those criminals that used to do ransomware, and suddenly we will see, using AI and using all the new technology, those criminals are gonna become super criminal, I call them, and gonna switch from being kind of in this level to become much more sophisticated. I don't think that they're gonna be able to go all the way to the nation-state level, but it's like, can they start taking vulnerability, exploit them, use them in order to, do whatever they need to do in order to gain access into a supply chain and insert their code in order to do whatever they want? Probably, the probability is higher now than it used to be before. So now it's like, I'm kind of really concerned about this shift from criminal to be just criminal to be super criminals.
I agree.
Okay, so Dr. Lilly, Mr. Dev, thank you so much for your time today. The information was great. I appreciate the time to sit down and talk with you and answer these questions.
And thank you.
So I just